if a serious offer showed up in the next 6 to 12 months, and I mean a real one, with real terms and a real timeline, would you run a structured process or react to the one buyer? Would your numbers actually hold up under actual scrutiny? Would you feel pressure to take whatever the offer was that was on the table? Or would you feel the freedom to walk away? You don't need to answer these out loud, but you need to be honest with yourself about where you stand. Because most founders don't struggle here because they built something bad. They struggle because they started this conversation way too late. Hey everybody, welcome to the Going Beyond the Deal podcast. I am your host, J. Michael Fischer Jr. There's a conversation I've had more times than I can count. A founder sits across the table from me. He's built something real. Revenue is strong. The team is growing. The brand has weight. By every external measure, this person has made it. And then they say something like, I think it might be a good time to start thinking about what's next. And I already know they're late. Not because the business isn't good, not because they've missed some magical window that's closed forever, but because the moment you start thinking about an exit as a reaction to something, a slow quarter, a burnout season, an offer that landed in your inbox, you've given up something that's the most valuable thing you ever had. And that's leverage. Not valuation, not multiples, leverage. The ability to shape what happens next instead of responding to it. I want to talk about why that happens, what it actually costs, and what the founders who get this right do differently. Because the gap between those two outcomes is not talent, it's not luck, and it's not timing. And most people misunderstand what that word really means. Here's what nobody tells you about an exit. Almost no one plans it. Somehow it just magically shows up. An inbound offer lands. A competitor gets acquired, and suddenly your phone rings. An investor starts asking questions about liquidity at a board meeting. Or, let's be honest, you wake up one Tuesday and realize the thing you built is running you instead of the other way around. And that feeling doesn't announce itself. It doesn't show up as a crisis. It shows up as quiet weight. You're still performing, you're still leading, you're still closing, but something shifted. And you can feel it. You start thinking about what this thing would look like without you in it, without you in the room every day, what it might be worth, what life could look like on the other side for you. That's how the exit enters the conversation for most founders, not as a strategy, but instead as a feeling. And feelings are fine. I'm not dismissing that. But feelings don't build processes. Feelings don't create competitive tension between buyers. Feelings don't protect the downside when someone slides a term sheet across the table with an earnout baked into the back half. Strategy does. And by the time most founders shift from feeling to strategy, the timeline is already compressed around them. Let me go one layer deeper, because I've sat across the table from enough founders to see where this breaks down, and it's always the same pattern, wearing a different outfit. The first version looks like patience, but it's not. It sounds like, after we hit this next milestone, or once things settle down, or I just want to get through this quarter and then I'll think about it. The goalpost moves every time. And what feels like strategic patience is actually avoidance dressed up in business language. By the way, I've done this myself. Not with an exit, but with decisions I knew I needed to make. And I kept telling myself the timing wasn't right. When I walked away from a guaranteed salary that felt like safety, but was really a ceiling, I kept saying, after this next deal, maybe it's next year. And I did that for longer than I wanted to admit. The timing is never going to feel right. That's the point. And if you're waiting for it to feel right, you're waiting for permission that isn't coming. Now, the second version looks like confidence. Revenue is climbing, headcount is up, the brand looks real from the outside. So the assumption is we're ready. If someone came knocking tomorrow, we'd be fine. But growth doesn't mean readiness. Growth means visibility. And visibility without preparation is just called exposure. I've watched founders walk into diligence thinking their growth story would carry them. And then the questions started coming. Customer concentration, key person dependency, revenue quality, margin sustainability, and every question that doesn't have a clean answer doesn't just slow things down, it shifts the power to the other side of the table. Growth got you in the room, but preparation is what keeps you in control when you're there. The third version, and this is the one that gets the most capable founders, they think they have an opportunity. Someone reaches out. The interest feels real, the conversations start moving fast, and suddenly you're in a process. But it's not your process. You're responding to the other person's timeline. You're answering their questions. You're reacting to their pace. The whole thing feels like momentum because things are happening. Calls are getting scheduled. Documents are getting exchanged. But momentum and control are not the same thing. If you didn't design the process, you're not running it. You're inside of it. That's not partnership. That's constraint. Now, here's where things get really heavy. Because when I say lost leverage, I don't mean it as a concept. I mean it as a moment, a specific painful moment that I've watched founders sit inside of. And here's what it looks like. A founder I worked with, strong business, excellent reputation, years of disciplined growth. He got serious inbound interest. Conversations moved fast, an LOI got signed. It felt like everything was coming together. And then diligence started. Financials needed more normalization than expected. The growth story got pressure tested in a way that nobody anticipated. Risk areas surfaced late. Things that could have been addressed 6 months earlier became negotiation leverage for the buyer. And I watched this founder, someone who had spent years building something he was proud of, sit across the table while the price got retraded, while the terms got heavier, while the earnouts and rollovers and performance-based payouts started appearing in documents because the buyer could push them on him. That's what lost leverage looks like. It's not abstract. It's sitting in a room knowing the deal isn't what it should be and not having the ability to walk away because you don't have another option, because you didn't build one. No competitive tension, one buyer, one conversation, one outcome. Negotiation becomes one-sided. You're tired. You're trying to close. They keep trying to protect. And the most powerful tool in any negotiation, your willingness to walk away, is gone. Not because you're weak, but because you're late. And sometimes the biggest cost isn't even the deal itself. Sometimes the window just closes. The market shifts. The buyer moves on. And you're back to where you started. Except now, you're exhausted. And the energy you had 6 months ago, the clarity, that just doesn't come back on command. When you wait too long, you don't just lose value. You lose the ability to shape what happens to the things that you build. That's a different kind of loss. So here's where the conversation needs to change. Exit planning is not selling your business. I need to say this again because most people hear the word exit and they immediately think transaction. They think lawyers, bankers, and the big payday. That's not what I'm talking about. Exit planning is about optionality, timing flexibility, strategic choice, and the ability to say no from a position of power and strength, not hope. The founders who get this right don't wait for a process to start. They prepare before it ever shows up. They understand how a buyer is going to evaluate their business, and they address the gaps before anyone is looking. They clean up what needs to be cleaned up while there's no pressure. They create multiple paths forward so that they're never backed into just one corner. And the funny thing about all this, most of the work, it makes your business better whether you sell or not. Reducing key person dependency, strengthening your financial story, building a leadership team that doesn't need you in the room for every decision. That's not exit prep. That's just building a good business. The best exits I've seen didn't come from founders who timed the market perfectly. They came from founders who were ready when the market came to them. That's the difference. Let me leave you with a filter. something simple you can sit with tonight. If a serious offer showed up in the next 6 to 12 months, and I mean a real one, with real terms and a real timeline, would you run a structured process or react to the one buyer? I hope after this conversation you would think a lot differently. Think it. Would your numbers actually hold up under actual scrutiny? Would you feel pressure to take whatever the offer was that was on the table? Or would you feel the freedom to walk away? You don't need to answer these out loud, but you need to be honest with yourself about where you stand. Because most founders don't struggle here because they built something bad. They struggle because they started this conversation way too late. The founders who exit well aren't the ones who got lucky with timing. They're the ones who aren't constrained by it. Because in the end, exit isn't about selling at the right moment. It's about never being forced into the wrong one. That's how you protect what you've built. That's how you honored the years of hard work. That's how you make sure the ending of this chapter is something you chose, not something that just happened to you. Listen, if you want to have a real conversation about exit planning, I'm really, really happy to have it with you. If this resonated, please subscribe. I put out content like this every week for founders and leaders who take their work seriously. Let's continue to build something meaningful together. Have a good day, guys.